Welcome back to what was originally another Flash Facts, where we were going to skip the cheesy intro and go straight into the topic, but that didn't exactly end up happening. I decided to do this video because I thought it would be a quick research topic, but would actually become much longer than I originally expected due to the rich history. As such, this is more of a one-off episode that tackles the question of why do slot machines exist. If you think about it, it's a really weird concept. You walk up to a machine and insert money to spin a wheel at random, trying to match symbols, usually depicted as a fruit. In fact, the idea of slot machines is so synonymous with fruit that many Britons refer to them as fruit machines. However, this name typically has a negative connotation due to a different Canadian scandal that may be its own video one day. To anyone outside of our culture, gambling on a mechanical machine that pays you to pair different fruits and other symbols together at random may seem extremely bizarre. Well, the history of these quirky gambling machines is much more interesting, and likely longer than you would have ever possibly guessed. Let us first start off talking about what it actually means to be a slot machine. The typical connotation conjured up in our era would be a machine with several reels that spin and land on certain symbols, usually after pulling a lever of sorts or even a button. The term first originated, however, from the fact that a coin would be inserted through the slot of the machine in order to activate it, like a vending machine or gumball machine. During the late 1800s, slot machines were recognized more as a form of harmless entertainment rather than a tool to gamble with. In fact, they were typically even associated with toys and games. Since machinery in the United States as a nation were still in their infancy on the large scale, these slot machines were not considered a form of gambling. Interestingly enough, the United States in general did not have a lot of rules regarding gambling, unlike that of Britain, who was passing parliamentary acts in 1853 and 1854 to limit gambling. America's lax attitude towards the subject probably stems from the rebellious nature of the country's origins and wanting to be free of government control. After all, the country could have not predicted what the Industrial Revolution would change in terms of machinery and the new doors that would be opened for the novel ways of gambling. Enter Edward McLaughlin and his unclunkily named Guessing Bank Trade Stimulator Machine in 1876. You see, many things during this time period that were considered slot machines were actually known as trade stimulators, which gave out free food, drinks, and other prizes for playing a small game to entertain customers in bars and other establishments. This usually bypassed the parliamentary acts that were previously mentioned due to the fact it gave out non-monetary prizes at cheap prices, usually at the price of pennies and nickels. One of the first notable trade stimulators was the aforementioned Guessing Bank, which featured a bronze cowboy-like man sitting on top of a dial numbered 1 through 6 twice. The person would say the number they thought the spinner would land on out loud before inserting the nickel. They would put the coin in, which would twist the hand and spin the dial, eventually landing on one of the numbers. If the person had guessed correctly, they may have gotten a free drink or a piece of candy depending on the business it was. Anthony Harris would arrive a few years later to create a wall-mounted version of the original counter-sending machine, which would spread from vendor to vendor, being critically acclaimed, thus setting up a new market for these coin games. Sure, there are plenty of other forms of cheap entertainment, such as scandalous peep shows and penny machines designed to show off oddities, but trade stimulators allowed many to use their currency as a form to not only play new games, but win prizes. Several other trade stimulators would be created, such as one that would have the user insert a coin where several toy horses would race after it to see who would win. Overall, these games were viewed as childlike novelties that were nothing more than time wasters. Or so would be the case until 1890. This was the year that changed history forever. The year that the automatic poker machine was invented. Quite simply, it was a nickel machine that simplified poker and then had an attendant give out prizes to those who had won. The most well-known version of this game, and the earliest known model that matches the contemporary version of a slot machine, was known simply as the poker machine, created by Sitman and Pitt in Brooklyn, New York. It had the first known use of the classic slot lever, and would give out free cigars and beers to those who won via attendants who stood around the machine. It could not use an automated payout system as it worked on poker rules, which have tons of nuances and ways to win. In its most basic form, the machine consisted of 5 barrels, which would pull a card from a stack of 50. It would then show these in 5 different slots, which would work exactly like in the game of poker. However, wise-eared viewers may have realized it was a stack of 50 rather than 52 cards, like that of an actual standard deck. This was because even though it was the early history of slot machines, the house was already trying to rig the system. The 10 of spades and the jack of hearts were removed, which would change the likelihood of a royal flush by half of its original odds. The barrels could also have their cards rearranged, making it even harder for the player to win. This was also the very first system to post the payouts on the actual machine itself. That way the attendants can easily verify the wins. However, despite all of its similarities to modern slots, it is still a far cry from the contemporary form. From here on out, the information may get a tad murky. Several of the sources that I looked into seem to give different dates, names, people, etc. As for now, I will try to note discrepancies as I come across them and my guess on the most accurate form of the story, if necessary. In 1892, an inventor known by the name John Lighton would create a machine where a user would insert a coin and have it travel down one of two paths. It would either travel down a straight path directly into a deposit box for the house to receive, or it would go through the alternate path, activating the lever and dispensing 2 more coins out to the user. The design was refined over 4 different versions under the John Lighton Machine Company brand, and would be creatively titled Slot Machine No. 4 in 1893. However, the details of John Lighton, his company, and the device seem to be lost to time, and little else is known. Another man known as Gustav Friedrich Wilhelm Schultz in San Francisco, California, would later use a similar design to this machine and combine it with the modern spinning reel system that we know today. This device's name is not known, but many claim it was called the horseshoe slot machine, but I highly doubt this, considering the information talked about later in this video. Regardless, it was the first true game with an automatic payout mechanism. It would use a scale of sorts to have a token that was dispensed out of the machine, tip over the scale, and allow it to be delivered back to the user. These tokens could then be exchanged for several other prizes throughout the store. With his success in creating this machine, Gustav would focus his efforts on creating new oddities and games, and thus would take several other aspiring inventors under his wing to learn with him as he mastered his craft. One such person to study with him was Charles August Fay, also known as the father of slot machines. Previously a car mechanic still in the San Francisco area, Charles Fay would soon find out how lucrative the slot machine trade was and would build several of them from home while studying under Gustav. Fay would later go on to create his own company aptly named Charles Fay Company. While his first idea for a slot machine was supposedly created all the way back in 1887, Fay's plan wouldn't be fully realized until 1894. This machine was also suggested to be the elusive coin-operated horseshoe slot machine. But I believe that this machine is much more likely to be the bearer of the true name due to Fay's infatuation with horseshoes, as we will see later on. This machine was essentially a prototype for his next one released in 1895, known as the 41144. While this name may seem strange to us now, 41144 was a popular meme of sorts back in its antiquity. It referred to a peddler's game often played between those in the lower class that consisted of a player randomly pulling 3 numbers from 1 to 72 out of a container. The person playing would attempt to guess the numbers, sort of like a precursor to the Powerball. This was known as the number game, and any 3-numbered bet was known as a gig. One such gig was known as the washerwoman gig, and other names that were racially charged. This bet was stereotyped to be used by several African Americans, and had come to be a common go-to in the betting community, as it was revered as a superstitious set of numbers that would bring about good luck similar to the number 7. The 41144 machine itself used a series of spinning reels that would all have to land on the same number in order for the player to win. This game was supposedly based off of Gustav's unnamed machine. The 41144 became so popular in local saloons that Fay would continue on to create his own workshop where he would custom create novel ways to approach slot machines and expand his company. This vision would be brought to fruition in 1896. The next series of events could have started anywhere from 1893 to 1904, as many of the sources I found each had a different year listed for the most important slot machine out of all of them. Ironically, there is not a lot of information online regarding these. I'm inclined to believe, however, that the next part of our story starts in 1898. Looking for his next invention, Fay turned towards the market to see previous trends and what interested consumers. While the 41144 was most certainly successful, Fay also knew how big the automated poker machine had become. As such, he wanted to create an even more unholy abomination that would make even God shudder in its greed, leading to the invention of card bell. Or at least that was a plan. Fay wanted to create a 5-reeled machine that would use poker cards as symbols, and the user would strive to make a winning hand. However, when designing this, he quickly came to understand how infeasible a working version of this automatic poker machine was. After all, coding a program that understands all the intricacies and rules of a winning hand in poker is already a hard task alone. But this was at the time before electronic machinery. Everything had to be mechanically and physically calculated. As such, Fay opted for a new design that utilized a 3-reel system. Now that the machine had been stripped of its original function of a poker game due to the lack of 5 cards, Fay decided to replace some of the symbols, eventually landing on a 6-symboled system. Hearts, diamonds, spades, horseshoes, stars, and a cracked Liberty Bell. All you had to do to win was match your reels to one of the predetermined patterns, and you would get a reward. With an entrance fee of 5 cents, the payouts were as followed. 2 horseshoes resulted in 5 cents, or a break. 2 horseshoes and a star rewarded 10 cents. 3 spades gave 20 cents. 3 diamonds rewarded 30 cents. 3 hearts paid 40 cents. And 3 Liberty Bells would give the highest prize of them all, 50 cents. While this may not seem like a lot, it was big potatoes at the time. The 3-card suits were obviously remnants of poker, while the horseshoe and star were seen as symbols of luck, and possibly the horseshoe being a reference to one of Faye's prior machines. It is unknown from my research why Faye rejected clubs and why he used the Liberty Bell as the largest amount of payout. After all, the bell is typically synonymous with freedom and liberty, not exactly a trait associated with slot machines. Perhaps it was the inner patriot in him. The special trait of this game is that it used the previously established system of dispensing used by Gustav. As such, it could release dimes as automatic payment while still including spinning reels, which was its main selling point. No longer were the lines of people waiting for the attendant to cash in their tokens of questionable authenticity for mere pocket change. The future was here. Due to Faye's heightened popularity from his 41144 machine, many establishment owners in the San Francisco area craved to have one of these even newer slot machines in their parlors. Of course, Faye wouldn't simply sell them. He would rent them out to each customer and take approximately 50% of the coinage earned. This also meant that he had to keep tabs near them, and as such, he would not expand outside of his native city. And with that, humanity had witnessed the birth of a new monster, the very first true slot machine. It would seem that Faye was set up for life, but life is not known for being a philanthropist, and nor would Faye agree to this statement, as 3 major events began to brew that would change the slots industry forever. Out of the 3 complications, one of them is entirely of Faye's own vices. Due to the fact that Faye opted to receive a cut of the revenue from the machine rather than selling them, caused him to stay in the city, unable to expand. Due to this, any city outside of the San Francisco area was already experiencing an economic vacuum for automatic payout slot machines. Many other companies would step in to fill the role that Faye couldn't provide. The other 2, however, are unfortunate tragedies that befell upon our inventor. Despite making near an estimated 100 Liberty Bells by hand, Faye was left with only a speculated amount of 4. In 1906, one of the most infamous earthquakes known as the Great 1906 San Francisco Earthquake unleashed its wrath upon California. It would stretch nearly 300 miles and set fire to several cities, with photos of Sacramento being set up in flames. An estimated 2,000 people died from this tragic natural disaster. It was so significant that the current elastic model of earthquakes was based on this singular event. During the earthquake, around 96 of Faye's original Liberty Bells were destroyed and lost to time. Lastly, during this time, the government was undergoing a slow transformation. At the turn of the 20th century, several reverends and concerned mothers were actively participating in movements that urged America to rid itself of vices and other luxuries that cause sin. This defining moment of the Gilded Age was hinting at the start of the Prohibition era, but before they could outlaw alcohol, many sought to crack down on gambling. In 1902, the government attempted to put harsher restrictions on gambling in New York, and other territories were soon to follow. Not much is known about the law passing, but reverends joined forces with William L. Strong, a New York mayor, and his little-known police commissioner, Teddy Roosevelt, to create laws against gambling venues. These laws really only affected rural areas of New York that were not being run by the well-oiled political machines of the Gilded Age, unlike the much larger cities. As such, Faye in San Francisco, California was safe for the meantime. However, the true problem actually was when Faye realized he could no longer patent his invention due to his device being illegal in nature now. All of these incidents eventually heralded the arrival of a new competitor in 1907, a company known as Mills Novelty, who saw the success of slot machines and decided to put their hat into the ring. Mills Novelty was previously a company that focused on technology invested in coin-actuated vending apparatuses, or what we now know as vending machines, that would allow the user to choose what they wanted out of the device. This inevitably led them to the luxury cigar business, where they would invent boxes to dispense the cigars at the user's discretion. It wouldn't be until 1897 that they decided to apply this technology to other areas, such as slot machines. Their first nickel game was known as Owl, where the player would essentially spin a wheel and land on a certain result. This game led to the company adopting the owl as its official mascot and logo. The owner at the time, Herbert Mills, later met with fellow slot machine builder Matthias Larkin, who was stationed in New York, to create an office in San Francisco to help spread Mill Novelty's fingerprint in the luxury industry. While stationed there, Herbert Mills met Charles Faye and his money-making Liberty Bell. Just like any other part of this story, the details get hazy and the event depends on the two descendants of each inventor. The Mills insisted that while stationed there, Herbert Mills and Charles Fay reached an understanding and collaboration to create a new product. The Fays believed that Herbert rented one out and took it back with him to Illinois and New York to mass replicate them. Due to the nature of Fay's current situation involving a business that was rapidly undergoing new legal changes, as well as most of his stock being destroyed in a recent earthquake, I believe that the Mills story about a collaborative business proposal is most likely to be the case. Whatever the case was, this led to the creation of the Mills Liberty Bell, which had an honest name, hinting where the idea truly came from, another reason I believe it to be a collaborative effort. This rendition was mostly the same, being made purely out of cast iron. However, it would not be until later in 1910 that the operator bell, a variation of the Mills Liberty Bell, would be created. This version had a cast iron casing with wooden trims to make the machine look nicer. It also had a different neck, known as a gooseneck, for taking in nickels, making it easier to feed the money into. However, the largest difference was the most confusing yet most important one, the replacement of the previous symbols. During the time of these inventions, many people began to be fed up with the idea of slot machines, viewing them as devices that merely scammed their patrons and encouraged greed. This became especially prevalent when many gangs began using slots as a method of organized crime. As such, San Francisco banned slot machines in 1909, with other big cities following suit. Mills Novelty had an idea though. What if you covered up gambling with the guise of selling candy, similar to the earlier trade stimulator predecessors? Thus, the funniest events within the history of slots were born, which may not be saying much considering the subject. Anyways, the new symbols kept the iconic bell, but proceeded to add lemons, plums, which were sometimes displayed as watermelons, cherries, oranges, and the Bell Fruit Gum logo. That's right, they now produce their own line of bubblegum, or so that is debated. Some argue that it was made in-house, while others claim they bought it from a cheap company. The logo was extremely detailed, so in subsequent releases of the machines, it was replaced with a black rectangle with the word bar covering it, representing a bar of bubblegum. Today, the bar has lost all meaning and has just become a symbol for gambling in and of itself. The gum was said to come in many flavors like the fruits displayed on the console. Rumors, unsubstantiated but likely for the time period, state the gum was able to be traded in for payment at the front counter as a way to circumvent current laws surrounding cash payments on slots. Other machines would provide trade checks, which allowed further games to be played over the counter for extra prizes that may involve gambling. Regardless of the outcome, you were leaving with a piece of gum, and that's all the courts had to know. Side note, later in 1917, Mills would incorporate the term jackpot, originating from poker, into their slot machines for a large payout win, which would be integrated into our modern-day lingo for referring to gambling. However, this doesn't seem to explain the rise to fame that slot machines exhibit today if the entire United States was trying to phase out gambling. Well, while it was true that America was illegalizing the usage of gambling, we were heading out of the Great Depression, which would mark an era where the government was desperate for even a drop of money. You see, as the Great Depression arrived, many were exploiting the use of gambling to squeeze money out of others. The excuse of using gum instead of money was beginning to wear off in courts, claiming that you were still gambling your money for gum. The cases got so bad, in fact, that several innocent candy companies, such as ones designing machines for mints, were being taken to court for offering the equivalent of a punch card for people who bought multiple mints. It was then officially final. Gambling was outlawed. Well, all except for one state, Nevada. In 1931, Nevada legalized gambling as a means of producing revenue for the state after its sudden downfall into poverty due to the Great Depression. Las Vegas was growing as part of the industry, specifically William R. Wilkerson's Flamingo Hotel in 1945, who, fun fact, helped McCarthy initiate the Red Scare by publishing several articles fueling the fire. While the hotel wasn't yet open, notorious mobster Bugsy Siegel came across Williams' business and decided to use it as a means of creating a new public image for himself. For anyone out of the know, Bugsy Siegel was notorious for several murders and cooking the books to evade our good friends, the IRS. After obtaining a portion of the business, Bugsy threatened to kill William, causing the former owner to go into hiding in Paris. Bugsy took over full-time while his syndicate began to run the Flamingo in 1946. During this time, Bugsy struck a deal with Mills to create new fancy cabinets for the casino in order for the wives and girlfriends of customers to use while the men played the table games, due to the belief that women should not play these games during the time period. Bugsy later realized the potential profit after seeing the revenue generated with the slot machines was equal to that of the table games. And just like that, slot machines once again found their place in the last bastion for gambling in America. Slot machines would still take on several developments over the next couple of decades, however. While electronic gambling machines existed in the 1930s with animated horse races, the first electronic slot machine was not created until 1964 with Money Honey by the Bally Manufacturing Company, which, before this point, focused primarily on pinball machines. Because this machine had a bottomless hopper, it could dispense up to 500 coins at a time, allowing for larger payouts. These electronic machines eventually led to video-based machines using television displays, similar to an arcade cabinet. The first one created was in 1976 called the Fortune Coin, made in California but produced for Las Vegas. Further advancements allowed machines to get new features such as having a shared pod among several different machines, as well as having solid-state electronics. This basically allowed casinos to increase and decrease the frequencies of winning in the machine at any point in time. In 1994, slot machines had been ported to PC, and soon to follow were mobile games that encouraged gambling. With the slow adaptation of culture to accept gambling once again going into the 2000s, the United States decided to loosen the restrictions on gambling, allowing for the casinos and slot machines that you now know today across the country. It's not without its conflicts, though. In 2006, a new act was created by the government to forbid any company doing business with sites that harbored online gambling, a brand new frontier for slots. Even today, with the creation of loot boxes and monetization of random events in video games, the debate on gambling still reigns supreme. Overall, slot machines have evolved over the last 150 years as they went from nickel-eating trade stimulators to electronic parasites that feed on human addiction, and now you know vaguely why. Several other companies would go on to introduce new gimmicks into the picture such as bonus rounds and wildcards, but I figured that this already drawn-out video deserved to be given the most basic story of the invention of the slot machine. There are still several missing links within the history, but it is of no doubt that their legacy has affected the economy of the United States, as well as our perception of gambling and gaming as a whole. And with that, I would like to thank you guys for having patience with my horrible upload schedule. I also want to thank all of you for getting me to 69 subs. I enjoy making these videos, and I hope to make even more during this crazy time in my life where I'm transitioning to college. See you guys in the next video.